Sure. I can kick off by introducing myself and giving some of my background. So I currently work at iRobot as a test engineer. I graduated from the University of Rochester about 2 years ago in 2019 as a mechanical engineering student, and I had a minor in computer science. So I was a little bit involved in the robotics scene. I took classes with Professor Howard, and my capstone project was advised by Professor Howard. So to some extent, with who's your advisor, I heard. So to some extent, I was involved with robotics, and certainly that helped kind of get this job at iRobot, where I get to work with robots every day. A lot of what I do as a test engineer kind of entails working with the robots, kind of validating the system or the module level performance. So that can vary from, the robot as a system. Does it work the way that it's supposed to? Like if a consumer runs the robot, does it cover all the area that it's supposed to cover? Do all the modules or all the sensors work the way that they're supposed to? So what I do varies from, validating the sensor systems or to building kind of electromechanical systems or test fixtures that interact with the robot so that we can validate whether either the software or the hardware on the robot is working the way that it's supposed to. So that's kind of what I do at iRobot, and I'd be glad to answer some questions about that. Where?
I can go next while Dan finishes his coffee. So I graduated from UVR in 2007. I was a biomedical engineering major. And after graduation, I decided I didn't want to go into BME. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I took a position as a health research coordinator with the emergency department right in Rochester, and I learned about what this field of human factors engineering was. I learned about what usability tests were. I learned what it meant when people talk about human error and how it's usually not human error. And I decided to go to grad school for human factors engineering. So I entered a PhD program at SUNY Buffalo in the industrial and systems engineering department focused on human factors. And so in that program, I was doing research in health information technology, helping understand how the design of systems in the environment contributes to the success or failure of an individual's task, how there are human and just even psychological, behavioral factors that go into how we look at a scenario and how we work through it. And so that whole idea of the person, the environment, the task all coming together to contribute to the success or failure of that goal is what was really interesting to me. Except on my path, I decided that I didn't want to go into academia. I did not want to be a professor. So I had picked up some contract work. I started as a user experience designer for Eastman Kodak in Rochester, and suddenly learned that there's now this whole field of UX and this whole field of design, and went from research and applied work to industry and designing the solutions. I worked at Bose Corporation out in Massachusetts, doing user experience design for headphones and Wi-Fi speakers and Bluetooth speakers and home theater systems and mobile apps that control all of these things. And through the course of doing that design work and designing experiences for people, I also started learning about what product management was. And I have since shifted, and I've joined iRobot as a product manager for our digital features team. And we're responsible for the mobile app that you can use to control and customize your experience with your physical Roomba. And that is what brought me to iRobot.
Cool. Maybe I can go through my profile. So I have two stories to tell. One is my personal story to where I am today, and the other is professional. So I grew up in Clarkson, New York, which is that little middle of nowhere between Hilton and Brockport. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that area, but yeah, I went to school there, met my wife in high school. We both grew up in the same area, so went to the same high school, and we both went to college in Rochester. She went to RIT for graphic design. I went to the University of Rochester for ECE. And I got my bachelor's degree in ECE in 2010. And I followed that by getting my master's degree in ECE in 2011. I worked with Megan Epek in the computer architecture lab. And my area of focus was in microarchitectural optimizations, specifically around power consumption. So after finishing my master's degree, I really didn't know what I wanted to do professionally, and I went on a bit of a journey to find that out. The next stage in our lives after we graduated, we moved to Germany. So my wife and I lived in Germany for around 3 years. And that's where I learned about my love for cars, traveling, and beer. So I learned some passions through living there in Germany. And I also started getting a feel for what my strengths and weaknesses were professionally and what my interests were. And sort of a repeat throughout my professional career, every time I find an industry, after a while, I would sort of get bored. And I keep trying to scratch that engineering itch as I move forward throughout my career. So decided to try out, let's follow my interests. I'll go over my professional career in a moment. But anyway, we moved back to the States, and yeah, I decided to join the automotive industry because I like cars. I did a lot of DIY car stuff, and be it very old vehicles, taking them apart, putting them back together again, to engine tuning with like aftermarket Mega Squirt engine tuners, things like that. So we moved back to the States, worked in the automotive industry, and this is where we started setting down roots. We have a house, we now have 2 kids, and professionally, I found myself sort of blooming into this project management, program management role. I was always sort of on the edge between management, engineering, and I found that iRobot was a really interesting opportunity to sort of still remain in that management / engineering role, where I get to get into the details, but also give direction and try to find a way to make projects happen. So that's sort of my personal background. Professionally, when I moved to Germany, I started as a design engineer. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So design engineer was a very sort of vague job description, but basically what it means is I would make turnkey solutions for both networking and audiovisual solutions. So that would be something like a bunch of displays, a touch panel, a controller. I would design the HMI for those touch panels, and I'd work with the customer from the beginning of the process through them taking the system and paying for it and being happy or sad, fixing bugs. So it was a combination of design work, software development, and that was interesting. It was for the Department of Defense, and I eventually got bored. So I moved on to the automotive industry, as I mentioned, and where I first started was a company called Movimento, which was a very small company that gave me a nice opportunity to work in a breadth of different software technologies. At this point, I wouldn't necessarily call myself strongly a software engineer. This is where I really started learning about server application development, ECU, low-level embedded development. I also managed kernel builds for some of our ECUs. I did a big combination of high and low-level development. One of the things that really stuck with me was automation. Automation was awesome and is awesome. And I continue to this day loving it very much so. iRobot has a lot of automation. So this is a cool thing that I like seeing when I join a new company. After that, I wanted to go deep. I wanted to go into embedded development of some sort to understand a little bit more about how low-level software development works. So I joined a tier 1 supplier. If anybody here drives a General Motors vehicle, if it has a rear view camera, it has my software in it. So hopefully it's working and not buggy. I also, working as an embedded engineer, I worked on other products like their surround view systems. If you've seen GM and most automotive suppliers have multi-camera solutions that will stitch video together. This is something I worked on as a developer, transitioned over to project management at that point. So worked on little projects, maybe 4 people, large projects over a period of time, maybe 60 engineers working on a product at one time. And eventually I started overseeing all of our General Motors software development for our North American team. So that gave me this big level view of products. However, I will say that in that role, I still wasn't able to sort of scratch that engineering itch that I've always been chasing down. I was able to get involved with development of software, leading people management as well. And I just found myself getting a little bit bored. So iRobot contacted me, and really, first off, their products are really compelling. They sent me a robot, and it just kept reminding me how cool it was. So this was my first real exposure to consumer electronics and to robotics. Up until this point, I worked on gray boxes with embedded software in them that communicate over CAN with other devices. So yeah, so at iRobot, I'm in the role of software program manager. So I work on a product. So we're developing, say, a product for in the future, we'll be releasing it as a product in the market. And yeah, in this role, I get to work with Teresa. She's working on the digital team, and I meet with her every week to discuss how the team is operating. My focus is leading the team on the robot software side. So robot software includes low-level software, embedded development. We have a team of embedded developers that work on things like sensor integrations, reflexes, things like that. Then we have a higher level software development team that works on more application layer features like decision making around spaces, how to handle corner cases in homes when trying to clean them. And it also interfaces with cloud and our mobile app. So it really is an opportunity for me to work with full stack, all the way from low level up to high level. And yeah, it's been really interesting, and it reminds me of the thing that really scratched that first itch, that engineering itch in college. I think I was really excited the first time I made an LED blink on and off in the digital engineering class. That somehow was amazing for me, even though it wasn't that complicated. But yeah, so that really stuck with me, and I feel like iRobot Robotics is a good place to continue that sort of interaction with hardware, with your space. Yeah, it's been a really cool experience. I'm still relatively new to consumer electronics, but it's been a blast so far. I'm done. Long story. So what questions does everybody have? What are you interested in?
I guess if I might go, I was kind of curious with, I guess it's just, I guess more in general, but what has been like switching careers? I always found that as an interesting thing. Like, I assume like that's a big jump, right? For, I mean, any one of you, like it's, I guess, what does that feel like? And like, what is it like to kind of shift like the thing you've been focusing on for years and like have this like new thing? I guess, what does that feel like?
Yeah, I definitely have an answer. I don't know, Teresa, do you want to start? You jumped a lot too.
I did jump a lot.
I think we both did.
Yeah. So I had the same feeling of it being built up in my head that it was this like big, huge thing. And ultimately it's not. Sometimes depending on what you go to, it could be a really huge leap and there's more risk and more uncertainty. My leaps have been technically different titles, but responsibilities have overlapped, things that are interesting and it's overlapped. And half of it is because, and a number of years ago, I didn't know certain job titles were things I should want to even be interested in. So it definitely can feel a lot more of a change than it is in reality. The act of deciding when to do it, deciding if you want to do it, how to do it well, it's a lot about, just learning, talking, finding out from people who do that job, like, oh, is this job title, are these responsibilities things that are interesting to me? And if it seems like they are, and it seems like I'm good at those skills, and like, then it's working on getting a chance and practicing and trying. So it's breaking it down in reality is much easier to digest than just thinking like it's a whole huge, like, all out change.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yeah, that's yeah, encouraging.
I changed from initially on a path towards academia. I was maybe interested in going down the PhD route, and I decided I wanted to try something else. I went to the Department of Defense, then to automotive, now to consumer electronics. And I would say at the beginning of my career, it definitely was a lot more overwhelming to try to emerge into a new industry. You're just nervous that you're not able to immediately demonstrate what kind of value you can bring to an organization. But I always have evaluated like the engineering mindset from the perspective of not necessarily what a person has done, especially earlier in their career. It's more like, do they have that ability to learn new things? And I think that that's a really important skill to focus on as you're entering the workplace, is just keeping in mind that yeah, one of your biggest skills that you'll have out of college is having the ability to learn new things that are complex. And from that mindset, and from having the ability to sort of stick with something until you get it, be it whether you're an application-based learner or you learn through reading things, which I don't. Yeah, as time goes by, you start building up experiences, and those experiences make it very easy to draw parallels between what you've done and what you are interested in doing. So the jump from automotive to consumer electronics, it was very easy, picture to draw, because a lot of the same problems exist between the two. There are new challenges, and that's actually one of the reasons why I was driven to join something new. The complexity of putting a robot into a home is really huge. Prior to this in the automotive industry, I would receive a list of a couple 100,000 requirements, and the team would decompose that into functional requirements, develop the features, test them, etc. In robotics, it doesn't feel that way, at least in the consumer electronics market. You really have to be intelligent and think through what you're doing. And yeah, I've found that really appealing. And I think a lot of my prior experiences have mapped well to this. It's just a new challenge. So yeah, it's awkward interviewing, especially if you haven't worked a number of years in jobs. But yeah, being able to learn is the most critical piece. And it just, jumping from place to place, it should be driven by your interests. That's one thing I'll say. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you both. Those were both really thorough and like meaningful answers. So thank you.
I don't know if I can contribute anything to this. It's my first job, so I can
learn.
I'll learn. This was as much of an answer to me as it was to you all.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention, I know Rachel, you mentioned or you asked a question to us in email about things that are sort of interest to us. And one topic which is really interesting for me is emerging sensors and being able to sense your environment. There are a lot of neat technologies out there that today are applicable and somehow close to market that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago. For instance, one thing that seems pretty cool is being able to utilize Wi-Fi perturbations in Wi-Fi signal to image 3D spaces. This is something that absolutely is applicable to products that, say, iRobot produces, being able to determine occupancy of a home or events that have occurred in a home. That's an example of maybe some sensing that is able to build up within the ecosystem of IoT devices in a home. And at a lower level, we're always finding new and optimal ways of sensing what's around us, be it time of flight sensors or LiDAR systems. camera software is a rabbit hole, a very interesting rabbit hole that everybody is trying to get a hold of today, and it's not really completely figured out yet. So there's so much, there's so many interesting low-level problems and high-level problems to get involved in. Yeah, I'm interested in all of them. So.
What else you got, guys?
I was curious, like what like projects or like products have like robots have you guys worked on at iRobot, like personally?
I will not go first. I don't have great answers here.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead, Onur.
Yes, so being a test engineer, I've practically got my hands on from the oldest robots to the newest unreleased robots that we have, including a lot of different robots that we use to test our robots. So we'll have a lot of things like robotic arms that are used to test our robots and you know, like grab them and like put them in different positions or run them over different floor types to, or like while they're cleaning, like move them around and stuff like that. But yeah, a lot of what we have produced so far, at least what I've worked with, have mostly been home care products. So like the robotic vacuum, Roomba is synonymous with the iRobot at this point. I've met a lot of people who have told me that they have a Roomba. It turns out to be from like another company at this point. So I think at this point, it's just kind of like a robotic vacuum is called a Roomba, regardless of where it comes from. But we also have like the mopping robot, for example. So it's they all of them are about like maybe a year and a half or 2 years spaced apart. It's so the testing of those obviously have a lot of the newer technology that's been integrated in the past couple of years. So kind of testing that, you need to at least be familiar with both the technology and how the people who have implemented the technology are using it. So that's where like the advantage of having a software background comes in as a test engineer, where you know there's some bug going on with the robot and you're not able to kind of gain access or get an immediate answer. It's nice to kind of be able to go digging around in the source code or be able to take the robot apart and understand like what is the sensor supposed to be doing and whatnot. So from that aspect, yeah, a good amount of robots. We have like a pile of broken robots at the corner of that our interns used to like scrap up and build together robots. The robot at my house actually I built as an intern based off of like all the scrap parts that they threw in e-waste. So you just go dumpster diving with your feet up and come back up with any piece that's working and just build a robot from ground up.
Yeah, I joined iRobot not long ago, so I haven't worked on a ton of projects. I'm working on one of our next gen products. I probably can't give tons of information about it, but yeah, that's just the nature of consumer electronics. We're always competing with our competition, but yeah, it's next gen robot. It's got new stuff in it. Compared to what's available on the market. We'll leave it at that. But yeah, I also find myself surrounded by robots after maybe 7 months of working for iRobot. Because I work in program management and I am in a somewhat strategic position within our project team, I receive competitor robots in my home a lot. So I have Shark and Ecovax, Roborock, a few others of our iRobot robots. And that's kind of interesting to see within this market, the competition, what kind of sensors are there, you know, evaluate pros and cons. There is a role in this industry called product management, that
too.
Sorry, yeah, product management. That that it's more of like a market-driven role where you're looking at a product, trying to place it properly within what's available today, pick what's happening in the future, and just see how your products will compare against competition if there is competition, establishing a business case. So we get to dabble in that a little bit. You know, iRobot isn't a huge company, which basically means you get to wear a lot of hats. And that's one thing that I do like about it, is being able to sort of like, okay, let's test out robots and see how they do. we're developing a new robot today. How do they stack up against it? Are there decisions that we can make based on what we've learned on emerging products that we think might make ours better? So yeah, that's the exposure that I've had. Of course, I have my own like projects at home. I'm a 3D printer person, so I like 3D printing and playing around with them. IoT devices, smart home devices, I'm somehow obsessed with these things as well. I consider these to be robotics, granted it is an embedded software, but yeah, so that's me. Teresa, you work with every robot at iRobot, I think, right?
So technically, it depends how you want to look at it. So our mobile app supports several, of the different robots that go into it. I don't have quite as many robots in my home as Dan does, but the idea is I'm not breaking them apart so much as like understanding how to use them and how they show up. And, you've got different features on different robots or different products. So then when you're trying to design experiences in the app, how does it handle it when this robot can do one thing, but the other one can't? And what happens for the user when you're trying to go across experiences and controls. So in that way, yes, many robots.
I just had a related question. So I know like iRobot's mostly known for its like commercial robots, but like how connected is that with its like military like robots? How are those like interconnected, or is it at all?
Not really. Our military division was kind of a subdivision within the company, and it was, I think, either sold off or disbanded about 5 years ago. There's certainly a lot of people who worked on the military robots at the time who are now still on with iRobot working with the consumer robots, but there's not a ton of relation between the two. Maybe Teresa or Dan, you guys can talk to what specific technologies might be used, or if that's what the question is. But yeah, unfortunately, our military division isn't as active, or it's not active at all.
Yeah, interestingly enough, when I was looking for another opportunity that sparked my interest, I actually did interview with the ground systems robotics team here in Michigan. I'm located in Michigan, by the way. And I saw iRobot stuff all over the place. So it's like vestigial leftovers from iRobot, but there are contracting agencies and teams within the military which are still developing these solutions. I think the gist of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically is that the business, military business, having worked with DoD, I can definitely confirm this, operates differently than consumer electronics. So you have large contracts, lots of dollars that last for many years, maybe 10 to 20 years, long contracts that are renewed over time. They have certain objectives that they're trying to meet, and that's exactly the opposite of consumer electronics. So I think the idea of having a business that's trying to operate within these two different segments, it doesn't work. It doesn't work well, which is why there was so much of a demarcation between the two businesses. And at some point, yeah, iRobot decided that they wanted to focus on the consumer more. And that's, that's where all of our development is in now. And there are emerging markets within consumer electronics and robotics that iRobot, of course, and all of the other robotics companies out there in consumer electronics are looking into. But if you are ever interested in the idea of like robots, specifically around the Department of Defense, the companies do exist. There's big ground operations base here in Michigan, and that are more scattered around. And it's definitely a different development life cycle. So you're involved with long contracts, and usually the requirements are a little bit looser, at least based on what I've seen. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, thank you. Like, I was just wondering that because I'm from Seattle, and like being next to Boeing, I've heard rumors about like how 80% of their like money comes from Department of Defense contracts and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember we once had a project at my first company I worked for, which made these AV and networking solutions, as a project called Skiff in a Closet. A skiff is a secure space, so it prevents any sort of communication inside of the room to get out, and vice versa. So we're talking about foil in all the walls, secure networking getting into the room, that kind of thing. So Skiff in a Closet basically was, we're going to take a general and we're going to make a closet into his office that will be a skiff. And that was a, I think, $250,000 contract to install an office into what was effectively a broom closet. So that's the scale of the type of projects that you would see, like the kind of money being spent. It's a different world, but also like the timeline's different, priorities are different. Yeah, it's a different world for sure. Yeah. Skipping a closet, it brings back memories.
One interesting thing about having, or at least working at a company that has this type of military background is a lot of times I'll find myself just kind of diving into the previous research that a lot of the engineers have like done to see what they worked on while they were working with the military and how that translates to like consumer electronics. Like, for example, our camera-based robots use VSLAM, which a lot of the people who implemented that worked in the military because it applied, and they had a bunch of research grants. There's a lot of people who just kind of ran around and ran experiments with a lot of like computer vision algorithms or like path planning algorithms and stuff like that. So you get to kind of, or like Dan was talking, like sensor integration for kind of improving autonomy. That was really big for the military stuff. So you kind of look at a lot of these project listings, and a lot of them will have these patent numbers, and you go in and you see it's like, it's filed by iRobot military, but now it's on like a Roomba or something. So it's really interesting how the integration of that happens, and the ability to kind of have that playground with the research funding, or sorry, the military funding that they previously had translating to the consumer facing aspect is definitely, I think, helped iRobot a large amount. But that's kind of nice. It's nice to just kind of have the archive available to someone who's really interested in robotics and kind of like new to the industry. It's just in your spare time, you just write down, like, you just go folder diving and try to find any documents that people who have PhDs or experts in this field have written at the time.
I kind of have a question that maybe connects to that narrative. I know you mentioned you can't maybe explain the end of this process, but I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, I think my family had a Roomba at one point. And you've kind of mentioned developing sensing right now, but I guess the broader question I have is like, how has the Roomba or just the general task of iRobot changed as the company's existed? And like, what parts of academia are still trickling in, or what parts are kind of still unsolved? Like, where is the space at, or what does it look like?
All right, I'll start. You guys supplement. So your parents had a Roomba 10 plus years ago, right? And how it did then and how things do today, right? It's going to be better. So there are pieces that we can evolve and improve, because just in general, we had tech and we learned how to use it better, but then also the tech improves over time, right? So you're getting new factors to go and enhance and increase capabilities and performance and all of those things. And I think the biggest change for iRobot consumer electronics in the last 10 years is something that we're actually in the middle of that transformation now. And so the idea of selling your parents that robot and then they're happy, cool, that's important. It's really, it's great. We want you to like that product. The shift is that we actually want you to really also love iRobot. We don't want you to just be like, cool, the robot's pretty good. We want you to feel like iRobot is helping you with you being able to do more with your life because your robot's doing the cleaning for you. We want you to be able to have a relationship with us where, you get this product and you bought it from us, but now it's fitting into your life in a way that fits you. And we've created it in a way that's flexible enough to let it do that and adapt to your needs as an individual. And so this idea that it's more than just a product that we sell you is probably the biggest new thing that the company's taking on. the quality of the product, still highly important and really there, but we also want to meet you on the other side with the experience that you have with it and with us.
Yeah, definitely. I'd second that. And I think that one of the shifts that you will have seen in specifically consumer electronics is the idea of connected devices. It's kind of a buzzword these days, IoT. It's a real thing for consumer electronics to try to integrate with, say, the tech ecosystem you have in your home. You know, I mentioned I'm kind of an home automation nerd, and the idea of being able to integrate any sort of tech into my home in that way is appealing. It's more accessible to people with Alexa devices in their home, Google Assistant, Home Assistant, whatever people happen to prefer. So integration of these smart devices in a home, I think, is a big driver for a lot of the types of features that we look to offer. And you know, one of the, I'll say, challenges which all robots really have and will have as we improve our products over time is localization and dealing with tough situations intelligently. You know, maybe the first iteration of robots, they would do something like ranking back and forth within a space, do their best to clean a space. Well, you know, to what Teresa was mentioning, trying to, you know, make people really like iRobot as a company. Part of that is making our products more intelligent so that they can fit more easily within their home, which sounds like, you know, maybe a simple switch to flip, but it's quite difficult when you are talking about, say, 200-old homes in Boston. You've got this 100-old house in Michigan. You've got brand new homes of different styles. North America is different than other segments. There are a lot of problems to solve in terms of just maintaining intelligence while cleaning a space, but also the services that you provide. You know, that there was probably a time when people didn't feel comfortable with a camera on their phone because they thought it was a security risk. But as security measures increase over time and people just become numb to that concern, yeah, the ability to do things in your home with cameras increases, not just homes, cars as well. Like everything definitely is opening up in terms of what you can do for users. So yeah, there are a lot of concepts on the table. You know, we have a yearly hackathon within the team, and there are so many ideas that are not in our products today. With good engineers and thinking about the environment that we're in, there is always going to be a slew of interesting problems to solve. So,
yeah, I don't know if I can add on a lot to that. I think you both covered a lot of the bases. One thing that's really fascinating me about iRobot is kind of a combination of what Teresa and Dan said. It's a combination of kind of new robotics technology formed into customer facing. So you have a lot of these research scientists, a lot of people who have backgrounds in robotics, in like computer vision and all these areas, working to improve how do we have our customer enjoy their product the most. So it's not necessarily that they're sitting down and trying to invent a brand new algorithm. It's a lot of times it's modifying or combining different aspects of a lot of different robotics facets to create a robot that you're comfortable with having, you know, roaming around with your kids, running around and stuff like that. So it's a very tough issue with robotics, especially I think that facet or that layer of kind of introducing robotics into human life hasn't still been traversed yet. I think the earliest kind of product to traverse it is the robotic vacuums, just because it's fairly straightforward to kind of have it do a nice task for you. But even within that, you need to solve the problem of how do we have this robot not be intrusive to the person and make them feel secure with it operating around. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of intelligence and autonomy that goes into just being able to do that. It's not just a robot that smacks around your room and then eventually ends. You want it to be integrated with your home automation or the IoT devices that you have, so that when you leave the house, it doesn't intrude you too much. Even when it is working with you, you want it to be as quiet as possible. There's just a lot of facets that a lot of really smart engineers are working on to fix. So yeah, I don't know how much academia really deals with that. I think just the fact that it's consumer facing and industry facing, that just brings out a whole new challenge.
I guess I had another question. I was doing a little kind of side research as you guys have been talking, and I see you guys have a product, or sorry, iRobot has a product called Root, which seems to be kind of a more educational like robot product. Have any of you guys like worked on that, or like, I guess I'm curious what portion of the company is that, and like what was the push to start creating that, and like what's the space that wants to fill, I guess. I think it looks really cool, by the way, but I was just curious.
Well, I can speak to it a little bit. Granted, I haven't really worked on Root specifically, so feel free, Teresa or Onur, to jump in. But yeah, it's separate from our other consumer electronics products, and it's a separate team. But I think that really one of the big we'll say drivers at iRobot is education and knowledge. And I think that our CEO is really driven to take part in educating everybody about robots, about technology. We're all given some time that we can take to contribute in STEM in some way. And I think Root is just a manifestation of this desire to take part in education and do cool things with technology and have people learn. So there is a team which works on Root. It's a little bit different than, say, a project I'm working on, which is chasing down a certain schedule. We have certain features that we need to provide in a physical platform. Root, I believe, is an iterative effort to try to grow this solution and do cool things with it, and take part in STEM, take part in the learning process, getting robotics into schools so kids can play with them. And I know for sure when my 2-year-old is a little bit older, he's going to get one. Well, I'll get one, and we'll play with it together. But yeah, I don't know, Onur or Teresa, if you had anything else, but yeah.
I don't have a ton to add to that. I mean, Roots, I haven't personally worked with it. I know that there's like an online portal where you can work with a digital route on like a online platform, but that's the extent at which when I've attended STEM events and stuff, people who know better about that stuff have taught me how to use it as well. So, but it is pretty cool. I mean, I have a cousin who has a fairly young kid who's interested in robotics, and he got one for him, and it seems like the kid's pretty happy with it. I don't know. They do lose interest really quickly, as in like when you're 6 years old, nothing really interests you for longer than a week. But it took a week for them to at least play with.
That's really cool. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I will say, to add on to that, like iRobot definitely is a different kind of culture than the standard kind of company I've worked for. I've worked for very big companies, hundreds of thousands of employees, worked for very small companies. And yeah, you kind of feel what are the objectives of the company when you work here. There are a lot of really smart people. Anytime you have a cool idea, there's somebody else who kind of shares it and wants to talk to you about it. Yeah, learning is something that you do for your entire life. And I think yeah, that's part of the iRobot brand and part of our culture as well. And you see it in our products. When you look at the problem, how do you vacuum a home with a robot? You can probably think of pretty quickly what would be your initial approach. And yeah, iRobot is iterated on that technology from a software perspective. And we have a very sophisticated mechanism through which we do this. The software is very sophisticated and a culmination of a lot of smart people, a lot of good ideas. And it's cool to see products that are made up that way. In the automotive industry, there's a lot of sort of penny pinching, good ideas, you try to make it fit within a window, try to make X number of dollars, and you work with suppliers to optimize costs, development time. Yeah, at iRobot, and maybe this applies to other places in consumer electronics, I'm not sure, but there's a lot more drive towards just doing the right thing for the consumer, trying to do things in an intelligent way. And, like, don't develop something unique that only fulfills one requirement. Try to do it in a way that we can reuse and build on top of in the future. So camera systems, for instance, we have camera on our robot. You can do a ton of things with cameras in software and in hardware. It's an open book, so you have a lot of sensors to sense your area around you. This car right here, it has 8 cameras, a radar system, ultrasonic sensors. It has a lot of stuff. But ultimately, Tesla's looking to swap out all of those sensors with just cameras if they can, and software. They haven't yet because it's hard. I know I worked for General Motors with their autonomous driving systems. It's very hard, and that's why you have so many sensors, including GPS, to supplement some of the things that you can receive using cameras. But yeah, this is a dream for all of us, being able to use one sensor, a camera, to accomplish all of the smart sensing that is possible. That's a challenge for everyone, and something that I think will be continually grown into in the industry and elsewhere in technology. Smart tech solutions using cameras, and yeah, that's an interesting thing that is still coming and not quite there yet.
So you mentioned that iRobot's like neither a big nor small company. So I was wondering like what the work environment's kind of like for you guys. Like, is it more like trending towards like a startup? Is it more like informal, or is it more the corporate side of stuff?
So I would say that I have not worked for a startup, so I am only going to tell you my best answer here is that does not feel like a startup to me. We are in a kind of growth period. I believe we got to be around 1,100 employees right now. It was about 1,000 when I started, and that's maybe 10 months ago. But so we're not super large, but we have a lot going on. So there's a lot of things that still need to be done and things that need to be followed. So it is a mix. As Dan mentioned, people are wearing several hats. So in that sense, sure, like the idea of having multiple responsibilities and the opportunity to explore different things of adjacent interest, because getting the perspective is super helpful. In that sense, there's an opportunity there, but there are roles, there are people responsible for certain disciplines, and that tends to take form as you make your way towards corporation organization.
It being my first company, I don't really have too good of a reference, but I would definitely kind of describe iRobot like exactly how it is, as a middle-sized company, where if you show the initiative and the ambition to work on something, they're never going to tell you not to. And a lot of times they will hand you the projects and that's really useful, as in there's not a lot of structure around what you can and can't do. Like as a test engineer and having a hardware background, I've had the opportunity to work on projects that varied from pure mechanical design and mechanical analysis to projects where like machine learning, where a couple of like the machine learning engineers were like, we don't have time to do this, let's hand it off to someone else. And I was like, oh, me. And then I took over the project. So it's nice in the sense that you have a lot of different projects you can do because of the size of the company, and a lot of great resources. Like for example, when I was working on that project, I could just pull in like like someone who's working on the machine learning team and ask them a bunch of questions for an hour, and they were happy to answer my questions. So there's not really any defined boundaries as to what you can do. And at least as kind of a person who's like just getting into the industry and trying to figure out what I like and what I don't like, it's great to kind of play the field and see what I can do. So in that aspect, the environment at iRobot is very welcoming for an engineer who wants to learn as much about robotics and different technologies.
Thank you.
So I have worked for, I don't know if you want to call it a startup company. It was 200 employees. We had 20 people in our office. It was pretty much like a startup. And yeah, like I said, worked for very big companies. And I think that what Onur and Teresa mentioned are pretty accurate. It's in a transitional period. The company is growing. We build hardware. Building hardware is hard. Software is hard, but producing hardware that you can sell at scale is very difficult and requires some organizational maturity to make it happening with quality. So yeah, iRobot really has a lot of knowledge around building of hardware, and it has a really strong software community. They're medium-sized, and like Onur mentioned, you know, if you're interested in something, jump on it. You can do it, and they're always interesting people that you can talk to about any, you know, cool ideas that you have. So yeah, I think the pros and cons of working for big companies, small companies, it's something that you kind of have to feel out. But I've always been driven towards sort of smaller companies because I like doing lots of different things. I like getting involved in stuff, brainstorming, coming up with new solutions, and not just software. You know, I didn't go to college for software development. I think I took one programming course at the U of R, if I remember correctly. It just happens to be what people paid me to do professionally for a long time, and that's sort of how I landed in software program management. But you know, I always have that electrical engineering lens that I apply to things usually, and it fits well. ACE, embedded development, these things kind of make sense together in some ways. So yeah, that always kind of fit well. But I've liked wearing a lot of different hats, and big companies you do in some cases, but yeah, it really depends on what you like doing, and you just have to try it out. Some big companies are great. You know, I have friends that work for Google and Amazon. Those are very, very large companies, and they work on a certain thing. At iRobot, I feel like I get a good exposure to a lot of topics. So it has that small company feel, but it's a medium-sized company.
I know like some of you guys have like graduate degrees, and I was wondering like how has that been like useful in industry? Like I've some other people tell me like, oh, you don't really need a PhD or a master's to go into industry, but like how has that like been useful?
Well, I definitely have some thoughts on that. Yeah, one thing I would say is I haven't worked in computer architecture professionally. And I think when I was in college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So if I could go back in time, probably what I would have done is I would have gotten my bachelor's degree, tried some stuff out, decided really what's driving me and interests me, and I might go back for higher education. But the thing that I got the most from my master's degree is I learned discipline, like how to get work done. I don't know if anybody's worked with Professor Epek before. Actually, I don't think he's at the U of R anymore, but if you've ever worked with him, like it was a ton of work, and it was really, really fast moving. And I had to learn how to do work effectively when working with him. It was a great experience. And this is where I got my work ethic from, was those last couple of years in college. So I always like to think that going to school for engineering, the biggest thing that you can get is that thing I mentioned at the beginning of this session is knowing how to learn. If you learn how to learn, that's how you can grow into whatever you'd like. So do it in your bachelor's degree. If you want to go deeper into topics, if you want to go into something more specialized, I think that getting a master's is helpful. And the PhD path, I was going down that path until I decided that I wanted to try things. You know, if you really are driven and interested in the topic that you're working on, it's perfect. Go deep. PhD, that's the place to go if you're really interested in building something new, and you know you're pretty confident that it's what you'd like to work in, because it's an investment. But I didn't know. So that's why I thought it wasn't a good idea to do it until I did know. So I might go back down that path sometime in the near future. Granted, all these babies I have surrounding me would argue against that, but yeah, so yeah, that's my view, you know.
Now, do you have a graduate degree, or did you go from undergrad to?
I went from undergrad to industry. I am shopping between graduate schools right now. So, but I don't think I can answer this question just yet.
So when I graduated, I knew I didn't want to go into BME. I knew I kind of maybe wanted to do something else. So I did take a job. I did not immediately go into grad school. During that year when I was working, I learned about the field. I then decided to go into grad school. I didn't know if I wanted to do a master's or a PhD. And so every school handles it differently, but in my instance, I enrolled in a doctorate program. I was awarded a master's after certain milestones were met. And for me, because again, I was still deciding, still trying to understand what I wanted to do or not, I did reach a point where, based on what I wanted to do next, a PhD wasn't required. It wasn't what I needed to do the things I wanted to do. And so probably one of the toughest decisions of my life was to leave the program before I finished it. So, you know, it's really about, you don't need a grad degree to start working. And if you have it, also okay too. You kind of are balancing that, you know, those first couple years out of school, like what is it that you're learning? Are you learning on hands experience in a particular domain so you know if you like the field or not? Or are you deepening your educational, you know, prowess in a specific field? Like all can't really go wrong because you're still helping yourself learn more.
Okay, yep, thanks. So we're nearing 5 p.m. So does anyone have any like final questions? Okay.
I might have one last one, but it doesn't have to be long. And this is just pure curiosity. I'm a mechie major, so I guess this is one of the more interesting things, at least to me personally. But I'm always curious if there's been like internal development into making some sort of a Roomba that could potentially go upstairs. I don't know if that's ever been a focus or an interest of people within the company, or you guys can even comment on that. But I was curious about that, I guess.
That was I can quickly make a comment on that. When I was an intern, we would have intern challenges. So once every month, they would give us a challenge of like go and do this, or you know, like drive the robot without any motors. So you just like spring load you just like spring load the wheels and then just pull it back and then see who goes the furthest and stuff like that. So that was kind of a silly project, but one of the projects that they also had was a robot that could go up the stairs. I don't know if they're going to take any of the intern designs seriously and try to go with it, but it certainly is kind of a joke that's thrown around of like, oh, like one of our safety specs, or at least the one thing that we actually have to have passed by like safety officials, is the fact that our robots don't fall downstairs. So I think if anything, we're really far away from going downstairs or going upstairs. But that was kind of a fun project to experience, was like building a robot that could try to go up the stairs. So it was just kind of like you had a gigantic hook at the front, and just if it latched onto the stairs, you were lucky enough. That was our design.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, we, as Onur was mentioning, we have safety certification around our cliffing sensing. So we have a number of sensors surrounding a robot. If you look at a Roomba, flip it around, you'll see a bunch of sensors around it. And basically most of those are there to prevent the robot from going over stairs. So I've actually in automotive, obviously, if I worked in autonomous driving, some of those topics in automotive, there are a lot of active safety concerns for products like that. This is the only real safety thing that we have at iRobot, because we do have a, you know, basically a weight on wheels, and it can hurt somebody if it were to fall off stairs. So we're really sensitive to that. And it is tricky to go upstairs, but like there's always going to be a solution to something, and I'm confident that somebody at iRobot is going to come up with the idea to make it happen. Keep thinking on it. Patent your idea.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Start thinking about that now and you'll get a job at iRobot for sure.
Okay, thank you for being willing to answer some questions a little past 5. Thank you guys so much for your time. This was really like insightful.
Is anyone graduating soon? It's end of April. How are things?
Nope.
Yeah.
A little more time.
Okay.
Still on the journey. Yep. Yeah. Enjoy. Focus on learning how to learn. Blink those LEDs. It's a blast. Good stuff. Buy a Picket. Those are better than the programmers they had in the office or in the lab when I went to school there. They had those ZIF connectors, which would clamp down on PIC microcontrollers, and those things always were like crappy. So yeah, Picket. Those are nice.